back, and now for the news in detail. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has sent a request to the EU for an extension to Brexit, but without his signature. The request was accompanied by a second letter by Johnson saying he believes that a delay will be a mistake. Johnson said he will not negotiate a further delay with the EU leaders. He vowed to introduce a legislation needed to implement his agreement in Parliament next week. The Prime Minister was required by law to ask the EU for an extension to the October 31st deadline after losing a Commons vote yesterday. Conservative lawmaker Oliver Letwin's proposal got 322 votes in favour and 306 against. The amendment has opened a window to push Brexit until January 31st next year. Meanwhile, European Commission President Donald Tusk said he has received Johnson's request and will respond after consulting the EU leaders. After the turn of events in London, France's President Emmanuel Macron asks British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to clarify his country's position on Brexit. The European Commission also calls upon Britain to share information about its next steps as soon as possible. Envoys from remaining 27 EU members will meet in Brussels today to discuss a course of action. The EU states have already agreed twice to postpone Brexit from the original deadline of 29th of March this year. Turkey says one of its soldiers has been killed in an attack by Kurdish YPG militia in northeastern Syria. In a statement, Turkey's defense ministry said another soldier was wounded in the attack on a patrol in the town of Tal Abyad. Earlier, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will crush Kurdish fighters in Syria if they don't withdraw as per the ceasefire agreement. Turkey has agreed with the United States to pause its military offensive in northeastern Syria for 5 days. The US says all of the nearly 1,000 troops withdrawing from Syria are expected to move to western Iraq. Speaking to reporters, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the move will help Iraq defend itself from the ISIS militants. Defense Secretary Esper said he discussed the US troops withdrawal with his French counterpart and the NATO Secretary General. He said there is a consensus between France and the US to jointly defeat the ISIS militants.
Yes, I had a discussion last week with my French counterpart, and I had a conversation with the NATO Secretary General. We both agreed on the importance of continuing the Defeat ISIS campaign, and we agreed to have a meeting on it this week in Brussels.
Mali's armed forces have killed 50 militants in an operation near Burkina Faso border. In a statement, the military said it has rescued 36 soldiers captured by the ISIS and Al-Qaeda-linked militants in September attacks. The military said it has conducted the operation along the French-Afghan forces. It said the operation has also confirmed the presence of women in the militant groups. Earlier in September, 38 Malian soldiers were killed near the border. Military posts at the Bulkesi and Mondoro were targeted in the deadly attacks by the militants. Mali has witnessed conflict since 2012 after an ethnic uprising by Tuaregs in the north. In Lebanon, a government-allied party has quit the coalition after the third day of protests across the country against tax increases and corruption. In a televised speech, a Lebanese Forces Party head Sami Yahya said the government is unable to control the situation. Shaken by the anti-government protests, the resignation of 4 ministers has given a major blow to the ruling coalition. But the resignations will not collapse the 30-member cabinet. The protesters in Beirut celebrated the news of the coalition party's resignation, calling on other blocs to leave the government as well. Prime Minister Saad Hariri has given a task to coalition partners to find ways to deal with the current crisis. The demonstrators are demanding a sweeping overhaul of Lebanon's political system, citing grievances from austerity measures to poor infrastructure. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington remains committed to peace and stability in Afghanistan. His statement comes after 70 people were killed in a mosque blast in Afghanistan. Pompeo said the United States will continue its fight against terrorism. He added that the US stands by people of Afghanistan who only want peace and a future free of violence. The Afghan government has blamed Taliban for the explosion, which the group rejected, saying Afghan forces mortar hit the mosque. In Afghanistan, the results of the last month's presidential election have been delayed. Election Commission's head, Awa Alam Nuristani, said the results could not be announced as per schedule due to technical issues. But Nuristani did not give any new date for the announcement of the results. Earlier, the Election Commission said 2.7 million of the Afghanistan's 9.6 million voters cast their ballots. With fears of fraud and threats of Taliban violence, it was a record low turnout. Switzerland is holding its national elections today to elect new members of both houses of the Federal Assembly. Multiple independent surveys show climate change has displaced migration as the top priority among the Swiss electorate. Opinion polls show Swiss People's Party will remain the largest parliamentary party with over 20% vote. But the support is down from the 29% of the governing party garnered in 2015. The Green Party, which won just over 7% in 2015, is now backed by nearly 11% of the votes. The Sotomo Political Research Institute said opinion polls point to a green wave during the vote. Bolivians are heading to the polls today to vote in the presidential election. Leftist President Evo Morales is running for a fourth term in the office. Opinion polls show Morales with 32% of the vote, while his main challenger, former President Carlos Mesa, has 27%. Morales has called on voters in the resource-rich Andean state to participate peacefully and actively in the election. Morales said the majority of Bolivia's electorate will make the polls a triumph of democracy. Meanwhile, opponent Mesa said he fears the elections will be fraudulent because of Morales' powerful grip on key organs of the state. It's a time for a short break, but coming up next in the Bulletin. 30 coffins discovered with mummies inside. And people in girlish dresses celebrate a zombie war. Welcome back. A team of Egyptian archaeologists have discovered a cache of 30 coffins. This is the first discovery of its kind in over a century. This report has more.
Egyptian authorities revealed details of the 30 coffins in the southern city of Luxor. Each casket has a mummy inside, which archaeologists say are in good condition.
The question is, what is the story of the cache? A cache means something hidden, something that the ancient Egyptians intentionally decided to hide. But from whom?
It has been determined the cache is around 3,000-year-old. Because the coffins are built for men, women, and children, archaeologists theorize they were made for a priest's family.
This will enrich our knowledge as Egyptologists about the belief of the afterlife, about the workshops that make all these beautiful scenes, the color, the religious scenes. All the Book of the Dead is for everyone, for the common people, for a king or for a priest. And this is why I believe this discovery is very important.
Such discoveries can revive the country's ailing tourism sector, which was badly hit by the unrest caused by the toppling of Hosni Mubarak in 2011.
A new series of graphic novels called Ignited tackles the topic of mass shootings in the US. It tells the fictional but tragically familiar story of 6 teenagers who survive a shooting at their high school in Arizona. This report will tell you more.
Written by Marvel's Mark Waid and DC's Kwanzaa Osei-Ifo, Ignited takes on the politically controversial topic of mass shootings in the United States.
Ignited is a story of a bunch of high school kids who have survived a school shooting and have subsequently been ignited. And now they have powers and abilities with the ability to shove back and push back against the forces and the politicians and the social people who have, the neo-Nazis or whatever, caused this sort of reaction.
But the series isn't your typical superhero fare. Ignited's first few issues discuss gun control, immigration, and police brutality.
The topic is a little hard at the beginning because it talks about mass shootings, mass murders, which are specific to the United States. It's not really common elsewhere, but there are a lot here.
There's more gun violence in the United States than any other industrialized country. Its civilians are also considered the most heavily armed in the world. And as of the 1st of September, there have been a total of 283 mass shootings in the States in 2019 alone.
New York City is known for many things, including its art. The Museum of Modern Art has been at the center of the Big Apple's dynamic art scene. The museum is set to reopen with an extensive makeover later this month. The details in this report.
New York's heralded MoMA reopens on 21st October after a multi-million-dollar makeover. MoMA, which moved here in 1939, has undergone remodeling 4 times to cope with a growing collection and increased footfall. This time the layout reflects the philosophy of the museum's first director, Alfred Barr.
When the Museum of Modern Art in 1939 built its first building, what distinguished that building most from previous institutions was it wasn't set in a park and it wasn't set up a flight of steps.
The upgrade cost $450 million. It means the museum will be able to exhibit around 2,400 works a year compared to an average of 1,500. For the first time, artworks will be displayed by theme rather than time period.
This notion of democratizing the museum, of making that whole ground floor visible everywhere and free, is very much part of this sort of character that we wanted to bring out together.
For people wanting to see Pablo Picasso's iconic works, his Water Lilies and The Ladies of Avignon will always be on show.
In Mexico, a huge crowd in ghoulish dresses gathered in Mexico City to celebrate the 2019 Zombie Walk. The event features some of the best fan-made costumes, special effects, and other props once likely to see outside the Hollywood. The report has more.
Doused in fake blood, wearing torn clothing and masks, the zombies gathered at Mexico City's iconic Monument to the Revolution. A large number of families participate in the event annually, with even children often dressed up in costume. Thanks to the TV series like The Walking Dead and games like The Last of Us, the undead have become the de facto monster of supernatural pop culture.
It's really a cool experience because we get together more as a family and my children learn to socialize a little more.
Since 2007, Mexico City has been celebrating Zombie Walk annually for fun as well as benefiting food banks and charities for those in need.
After so much violence, after everything that happens in this country and this city, this zombie walk is a little distraction to have fun, to be with your family.
After the zombie model march began in California in 2001, the event has become an annual tradition around the world from Toronto to Singapore.
And now the business updates. Australia's Qantas airline has achieved a milestone by flying the longest non-stop passenger flight from New York to Sydney. The flight took 19 hours and 16 minutes to reach the destination. Qantas hopes to parlay this test into commercial success. This is the first of 3 ultra-long-haul journeys planned by the airline this year. Just 49 people traveled on the Boeing to minimize the weight on board and give the plane sufficient fuel without refueling. Qantas CEO Alan Joyce called it a really historic moment for both the airline and the world aviation. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. For further updates, stay tuned with Indus.